Well, hello everyone again. It's Jason Haynes here from QPL Rural again, and today I'm joined by Geoff Minchin, Senior Land Services Officer for Mixed Farming Systems based in Temora. How are you going today, Geoff?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, so Geoff's here today, and with the increasing dry weather or the extended dry period we're experiencing at the moment, Geoff's going to talk to us today about confined feeding or drought lotting and stock management going into this dry period and how best to approach it. So give us a bit of background, Geoff, please, in what you're seeing out there at the moment and the decisions people have got to make going forward.
Yeah, look, Jason, we've sort of gone through quite a dry period from December till now, although December was quite wet for some people around, but we have been through a dry period and probably one of the driest and warmest periods we've experienced across the Riverina for quite some time. We've had a series of windy weeks where we've seen dust blowing and a few dust storms going through. We've lost a lot of cover and ground cover on country. We're now seeing quite a significant area of dry sowing going on, so the battle between livestock on farm and the cropping program, particularly on mixed farms, is there's a strong competition for area, and we're seeing a lot of people feeding stock, particularly autumn lambers, trying to maintain that ewe condition and get as many lambs on the ground. And at this stage, we look like we're going to start a winter with a very low feed base, and particularly for the eastern part of our region, going up onto the upper slopes and tablelands, they'll be locking themselves in for feeding right through into the springtime. If
it gets cold before we see a break, it's going to be it's certainly going to be a tight winter right the way through, isn't it?
That's right, and even at this point, the growing season for that area east of us is really starting to close down pretty quickly. And even with rain the next 2-3 weeks, they're not going to get any significant growth that's going to carry stock for any length of time. So I suppose the decisions that people will need to make, well, if they haven't made them already, is to start thinking about what stock they're prepared to feed and for how long, and how they're going to manage that process, and what is it going to cost you, and what's the budget, and what's the economics in what you're feeding, and how long you're prepared to do it for.
Yeah. All right. So I suppose that's where we start, isn't it? Start with the end in mind. Making decisions around stock. Yeah.
That's right.
So how should people be looking at their flocks, or what should we be looking at?
So I think you've really got to weigh up, look at your class of stock, your age, what stock you're prepared to offload. If that's what you're choosing to do, what stock you're going to offload. Have you scanned? Do you have dry stock that could potentially go out the gate and reduce your numbers? Have you got old stock that you could offload? Can you cull a little bit harder through some of your age classes and just reduce those numbers back a bit to make the amount of mouths on farm a bit more manageable, particularly with the price of feed. So barley and oats and hay at the moment is now starting to sell at a premium, or has been for a little while now. Do you have feed on hand? Is there barley in the silo? Is there hay on hand? And go through that process of what are you going to feed and how long you're prepared to feed it for, and what opportunities have you got to sell down some of your numbers so it's a bit more manageable.
Yeah. So it's easy to make a decision on say lambs you've got going to market, where there's an end point and a value at an end point. With ewes it's a bit longer, but you're feeding for production still. So you make that decision first, and then look at the nutritional requirements going into that period, and what you do a feed budget essentially on how much it's going to take and what you need to do to set up to get yourself through that period.
That's right, and there's a great app called the Drought Feeding app that you can purchase from the App Store if you've got a smartphone. which you can actually go through and do those calculations around particular feed stocks you might have available to you. What's the value of those stocks? What ration mix you could be using for a particular class of stock, and it'll crunch the numbers for you and tell you what it's going to cost you per head per day. And it'll give you the total cost over a given feeding period. Will help you make some of those decisions. It's probably not worth feeding stock at $10,000 or $10,000 a week, or an enormous amount of money, when at the end of the day, those stock, are they going to be worth that much? In some cases, yes. In other cases, perhaps not.
Yeah. All right. Well, pros and cons. Why should we consider drought feeding? Why not just leave them in the paddock where they are? Run through some of the basic pros and cons that I'm sure everyone's probably thought of, but sometimes we need to. Sometimes if somebody says it, it's a bit more obvious than you just thinking about it.
Yeah. So the confinement feeding drought lighting program that we've sort of been encouraging growers to undertake for quite a period of time now, since probably 2006 we first started. So we have a fair few runs on the board in terms of people putting them on the ground and building confinement feeding areas. And some of the pros, I suppose, for the most part, are it gives you a great ability to manage the stock. So whether you want to maintain a particular body weight, or you want to reduce it slightly, bring them down to, say, a score 2.5 or 3, if you've got that room to move. It gives you the ability to preserve topsoil and reduce erosion risk, protect your ground cover, protect any improved pastures you might have on the farm. You might have some country that's, good lucerne country or mixed improved pastures where you've spent $150 to upwards of, in some cases, up to $400 a hectare actually sowing and establishing that pasture. But if you continue grazing it over such a dry period, you can actually do a lot of damage and reduce it back to nothing, and even damage it to the point where it has to be re-sown. And as I said, reducing that wind and water erosion risk. Confining them actually reduces the energy needs of those stocks, so they're not wandering aimlessly around the property looking for a bit of grass or some feed. By confining them, you're actually reducing the amount of wandering that goes on. So the energy needs are less by 10 to 15% in some cases.
Well, that's significant, isn't it?
That can be significant, and particularly when you're looking at expensive feed costs. Some other things.
Go on.
Some other things, it can be helpful when you're wanting to manage lambs. So if you've got the ability to early wean or those sorts of things, you can get those weaners off and feed them in a lot, or feed them separately to you, which means reduces those feed costs, because if feeding those units separately rather than a ewe and a lamb together, the actual feed cost is reduced, or the feed requirements is slightly reduced.
Yeah, righto. And I suppose when you're controlling your feeding like that too, the other thing you're saving is food, essentially. Like if you can be feeding in an efficient way, you're not wasting as much feed with stock walking on it or wasting it like that. Like you might save energy needs, but you're also saving wastage on the product you're actually feeding out and buying into the stock.
That's right, and you can effectively manage and feed to measure. So your feed calculator will tell you the stock may need 0.5 kilo per head per day. So you supply your 0.5 kilo per head per day for the stock that you've got confined in those pens. They will eat 95% of that, or majority of it, efficiently, without wastage and without walking all over it and all the rest of it, or spoiling it. And you'll be able to maintain the body condition and weight of those stock without a lot of inefficiency and wastage.
Yeah. All right. So what sort of problems can we expect, or what sort of problems might happen if we start confining stock all of a sudden?
So once you confine them, I suppose that number one is you're taking on the responsibility to feed those stock and providing them the full amount of feed that they require, because there won't be any grass or anything in that pen. It'll quickly go to dust. So you're committing to feeding everything they require and supplying water, obviously. In some cases, infrastructure costs to form up some pens or build pens can be significant, although we would encourage people to try and utilise some existing infrastructure, whether that be holding yards or smaller paddocks that are handy to the silos, to try and reduce the amount of infrastructure cost. You can get some health issues, so grain poisoning, nitrogen toxicity, pulpy kidney, some of those things, salmonella can be an issue, but in a lot of cases those things can be managed by introducing them to a ration on a slow and gradual basis, and not changing that ration too much over time. And if there is a change, making that change over a period of time, not instantly. Vaccination in, vaccination out, and drenching in or drenching out was some things that we would say can help reduce some of those issues. So making sure those vaccinations and drench programs are all up to date, and being careful with your ration, and water quality and supply. One of the things we do run a training program, and one of the things we emphasise in that is when you commit to feeding, and particularly in confinement feeding, make sure you've got enough water on hand or water quality and quantity available, because it will be critical to making sure those stock are performing as they should.
Yeah. A lot of people, I know it goes without saying, but a lot of people forget sometimes that water's half your ration. You've got to have your water quality right, or stock simply won't perform.
That's right, and as we emphasise in our course, make sure up front, before even you start feeding, is that you've got enough water available, and enough water with good quality available, because you definitely don't want to be feeding for a month or 2 months and then all of a sudden the water situation turns dire, and you've got to offload anyway. Got to make sure that water availability is number one key.
Right, more important than a feed plan in a way, isn't it?
Yes, yep. And there's not a lot of fun in carting water for stock, and particularly when you've got large numbers confined, it's not really an option. You need it available up front.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Some practical stuff. I mean, there's going to be a question come forward about nutrition shortly, but let's start with site selection. How do you go about making a plan for these sorts of things? You've done your budget, you've selected the stock you want to keep. Where do I put them? How do I choose a site? What do I do?
Yeah, so for your site selection, we like. There's no perfect site for one of these drought lots, but there are a few little key things that we like people to consider. You don't want a dead flat site. You want some slope, so that if you get a storm, that there is the ability for the site to drain slightly, and you don't want to get too boggy. You want it a distance away from, say, a creek or a river. You don't want it right on the edge of a watercourse of any description. You definitely don't want it too close to your neighbour's house, because that's not that good for neighbourly relations, or your own house for that matter. You probably want it handy to your yards or hay storage, grain storage, so that you're not having to travel long distances to feed. All weather access, obviously. And again, the water quality and quantity supplied. The number one question we always get in our trainings is about shelter or shade. Is it critical?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, so we say inside the pens, it's not 100% critical, and there's been some research from feedlotting around the need for shade inside the pens. So the research is saying that it's not 100% critical inside the pens. What we would say is we would like to see some level of cover or protection, shade, shelter particularly on the prevailing wind side, so that it helps to keep the dust down, and also acts as a cooling mechanism, so that if you do get some hot days where there's a hot wind blowing from the west, northwest, southwest, northwest normally, there is the ability for that shelter or shade outside the pens to offer some level of cooling for those stock.
Yeah. All right. And look, at this time of year, it's probably not going to be as critical, but once you've built a facility like this, well, then you've got an asset there that can cover you for, probably our summer times, those traditional real dry periods as well.
That's right. Yeah. So, and you want to probably, if it's going to be, particularly if it's going to be a permanent infrastructure, you want to probably think about using it in all weather, through winter, through summer, and making sure you've got that all-weather access and it's built for all seasons.
Yep. Okay. So when you design your pen, areas, some of those practical sorts of things.
Yep. So we work on, in terms of density of stock, generally work on about 5 square metres per DSE or per ewe. When it comes to cattle, you're obviously looking at larger areas, so things like weaners, 10 square metres per weaner. If you're putting older cows in there, you're looking at 15 to 25 square metres per head. When it comes to cows calving or ewes lambing, it is fraught with danger in a confinement area. We've heard some stories that haven't been great with lambing or calving in confinement. There is some positives around of people who have been able to manage it, but often what we would say is things like if you've got ewes that are heavily coming up to lambing, you can have them in the confinement area. Then you might let them out for the lambing period, or loosen up the density with using some adjacent paddocks, and once lambing's finished, then you can actually look to bring them back into a confinement type area.
Yeah.
Some of the other things to consider around drought lot design, some of the more practical things, you've got to look at what you've got available on farm, what areas. If you've got a rocky knoll somewhere or a gravelly area on the farm, they're often quite good because they're stable. They're not going to bog up. You get good drainage off those sort of sites. Got to look at your the capital input in terms of feeders, troughing, those sorts of things. In terms of a drought lot or drought feeding or maintenance feeding, we probably would steer people away from using lick feeders in a way, because the cost of getting enough trough space is significant. So we would look to go to a trail feed into on the ground or on some rubber matting. And after a while, if those stock are being fed, on a daily basis or second daily basis over a period of time, you'll actually find that the feed pad will harden up, and you'll actually get a hard piece of ground where you'll be feeding on anyway.
Yep. And you won't get your losses in that ground feeding situation aren't that great, particularly on sheep. Once it's hardened up, is that right?
That's right. So particularly on our red soils, you'll get a hard, you'll notice on a farm track or a road that once you drive across it numerous times, you'll get a hard surface. That's what your feed pad will look like, and a lot of the light, sandy or loamy top on it will blow away. And feeding on those hard tracks, your losses are minimal after a period of time.
Righto. What about hay then? Managing hay feeding, if that's part of your ration?
Yep. So we would generally, in a maintenance ration, you always need roughage, obviously. So we would have that ad lib in a rack in the pens, and supply it as needed, and don't let it run out. If it's in the ration itself and you're using a mixing wagon or something like that, you might look at going to maybe some rubber belting or a rubber belting trough along a fence line or something like that, where you're actually feeding it into a slightly cupped area. that can contain that hay from blowing around too much. There's a whole lot of ways that you can supply a low-cost troughing, whether it be C-channel, guttering, rubber belting. There's quite a few options.
And if we do, if you're feeding into those situations too, you've got to be prepared to make sure those troughs are clean. You don't want to be just feeding on top of, fouled up or soiled or rotting forage in those troughs. You've got to be prepared to clean it out so that it's you still maintain your impact, your intake. So if you're feeding onto matting, make sure it's clean when you go to feed the next time and things like that. Is that right? That's
right. So that's the labour involved in feedlotting or drought lotting is something to consider. You've got sweeping out or blowing out any troughing you might have to remove any dung or dust out of those areas. Your water troughs themselves will need cleaning or draining, washing on a regular basis, depending on how much dust is rising and the style of troughing you've got. So all those factors you really need to take into consideration that it can be intensive, and you got to have the labour force or the ability to be able to cover doing the maintenance and the cleaning and the checking of those stock while they're in there.
Yeah. All right. Nutrition. Obviously now it relates back to what you're trying to achieve. But, starting with what you've got on farm, forages, grains on farm, know what you've got, like have feed tests done. Where do we start?
Yeah, look, my starting point is the drought feed calculator. So look at what you've got on hand and what it's worth, what's its value, and go through and the class of stock that you've got, input that, and it'll give you the ability to cost up your rations. And often for a maintenance ration, one of the fallback positions often is about 80 to 85% barley and 15% lupins or thereabouts, or some other protein source around that percentage. And what we often find with people is they'll start with something like oats and barley and lupins, or barley and lupins. Once those stocks run low, then they might have to move on to some wheat or something like that, and that is possible. It's just a matter of introducing it slowly. Some other things to consider, obviously we mentioned the roughage, so some lower quality hay in the pens is essential as roughage. But also consider some loose lick, particularly around calcium, magnesium, so your Cosmag, lime and salt type mixes can help maintain condition in the stock. Going beyond that, whether you need to use some of the higher spec loose licks in a maintenance type ration, probably not essential, but at least have the basics in there, those Cosmag and lime type blends to maintain the calcium particularly in the U mobs.
Yeah. All right, very good. So anything else do you think we should be aware of, Geoff? Anything else we should be thinking of this time of year?
Look, I think from my experience, I think we find, particularly in the mixed farming zone in the Riverina and out west, and even up on the tablelands, there's a lot of seasons where our autumn is a bit shaky, and I think these drought lots could be used. They may not be used every year on farm, but they could be used a lot of years on farm just to help protect that ground cover, protect your pastures. Well, you've got crop going in, you've got you're holding your normal numbers of stock, but you've got crop going in, so that essentially your stock density actually increases at this time of year because the amount of land available for those stock is reduced as crop goes in the ground. So if you start feeding stock on a regular basis, I'd be really encouraging growers to put them into a confinement space, whether that is a confinement lot, a drought lot, stock management area, whatever you like to call it, or even a sacrifice paddock, and if you find yourself at this point in time that you're feeding on a regular basis, I'd be looking at maybe not having those stock wandering around on your loosened pastures that are, waiting for rain. Maybe pull those stock into a smaller paddock somewhere close to the silo and actually setting up as a sacrifice paddock and feeding them in there until we get an autumn break.
Yeah, that's the plan. Sounds very good.
Probably another comment I'd make there, Jason, is often too one of the critical points around these drought lots is when to let them out. And this is something we do cover in our I call it a training. It's more of a conversation than a training. It's just trying to get some of the basics down. But one thing we will go through, and we see this after a late autumn break, is people will generally stop feeding a little bit too quickly, or if they've got their stock in a drought lot, they'll actually release them from the drought lot too quickly. So we encourage growers or discuss with them about holding those stock in there for a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, until that body of feed that you've got on the ground gets a bit of growth about it. Because if you let those stock out too early and they start chasing that green pick around, the actually condition of those stock will go down, and they'll quickly get on top of that feed, which will put you back in the situation of not having ground cover and no growth, and you'll be wanting to put your sheep back into a drought lot. Whereas often if you can hold off letting them out, let that feed or let that growth get away to some degree before you let them out, it can really set you up to for that growth to grow exponentially, and you're not having to put them back in the lot too quickly. So just really beware of not letting them out too early, particularly on a late break.
It's tempting, isn't it? It is tempting to let them out because you think, all of a sudden I can stop the bills. But grass grows grass, doesn't it? Like you've got to have a grass there to grow more grass, and you don't want to end up in a situation where you've got a green drought. You never get in front of yourself at all.
That's right. You'll just they'll chew it back into the ground as quickly as it got there.
For sure. All right, Geoff. So if people, essentially it comes down to planning and budgeting. Have an end in mind. Plan what you're going to do. Plan your ration. Where can people, you've got your app, that's good, and where can people go to if they're looking for a bit more information? The LLSs have plenty of information on hand. Is that right, Geoff?
Yeah, we do. We also run a half day workshop on stock management areas. So people are interested in those, in going through that training. I don't know whether to call it training. There's just a session workshop discussing different designs, different troughing. We go into planning and really trying to get people to put some dates on paper around how many stock you've got, which stock are you happy to get rid of early if you have to, or get rid of them up front to reduce the numbers, reduce the feed bills. We go through designing a drought lot and what sort of designs we can go through. There's not one design. There's any number of designs. It depends on what area you're wanting to put them into on farm and what area you've got available. So we run that workshop on a needs basis. Other than that, they can get in contact with me and I can talk them through what other growers in the region have done in terms of drought lotting, and we can go from there.
Sounds good. All right, well, thank you very much for your time, Geoff. If anyone wants any more information, Geoff is available at the local land service. He's based in Temora, but you'll have a local LLS representative in many places across the Riverina, so feel free to use the resources that's there. Once again, thank you very much, Geoff, and thanks for everyone for listening. I look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye.